They spent 30 years building trust, waking up early, staying late, doing the right thing even when no one was watching. They sacrificed weekends, missed birthdays, built something real, something sacred. And then, in a moment of weakness, in a flicker of selfish desire, they lost everything. Not because they killed someone, not because they were caught in a scandal, but because of a single act of greed, a forged signature, a misused account, a silent yes when the conscience screamed no. In just 30 seconds, the empire they built over decades collapsed. Not with a bang, but with a whisper, a headline, a leaked message, a paper trail. And suddenly they weren't the hero. They were the villain in everyone's story. Imagine a schoolteacher, respected, adored by students. Parents trusted her. She stayed after class to help struggling kids. She bought supplies with her own money. For 25 years, she was a role model. Then she was caught stealing money from the lunch fund. A few $100s justified it as a loan. I'll pay it back. She never got the chance. One mother found out. Word spread. News picked it up. Beloved teacher steals from children. She was fired, disgraced. No one cared about the 25 years of service. That's the cruel economy of trust. You can deposit goodness your whole life, but one act of greed empties the account. The judge who took a bribe. Or take the story of Mark Schiavarella, a respected judge in Pennsylvania. He sentenced thousands of juveniles to prison over minor offenses. Kids as young as 13, locked up for years. Later it came out, he was receiving kickbacks from a private prison company. Over $1 million in bribes. He was disbarred, sentenced to 28 years in prison. One of the kids, 16 years old, arrested for mocking a principal on MySpace, committed suicide after being released. That one act of greed, it didn't just end his career, it shattered lives. And now the man who once passed judgment sits in a cell, judged forever by the very society he betrayed. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "What is not good for the hive is not good for the bee." The Stoics understood. You do not exist in isolation. Your actions are ripples, and some once made can never be taken back. Greed isn't just desire for more. It's the willingness to sacrifice your principles for it. And once you do that, you fracture your character. The mask falls, the truth emerges. Seneca put it even clearer. It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it. A life spent building character, wasted in seconds for a reward that didn't last. How fast it falls apart. Think about how brittle trust really is. A father who lies once to his son, a partner who cheats once in a long marriage, a doctor who fakes one report. Each of them may have been honorable for years, but the moment that betrayal is revealed, the past is rewritten. We don't say, he was good until he slipped. We say, he was fake all along. That's the brutal paradox. Your one act of greed doesn't just destroy your future, it rewrites your past. Your legacy becomes a footnote to your fall. The final blow, you can't undo it. That's why it's so dangerous. You don't get to apologize and rewind the clock. When the lie is exposed, when the money is missing, when the story breaks, it's too late. You can cry, you can beg, you can explain, but the damage is permanent. Because in the eyes of the world, the one who betrays is forever a traitor, no matter how noble their story began. Greed is the silent architect of many empires. It builds with precision, it hides behind ambition. It whispers to the mind, just a little more. And that's the trap. Greed is not a strategy, it's a seduction. It gives, and then it takes everything with interest. What's most terrifying? It doesn't collapse through steady decline. It dies in a single flash of overreach. One moment, one decision, one step too far, and everything, years of manipulation, planning, sacrifice, is erased. Today we dive into the cold, unfiltered truth. A lifetime of greed is often destroyed by one final act of greed. And every time, they could have stopped. Before the stories, let's understand the mind of greed. Stoic philosopher Epictetus said, "Wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants. But the greedy man does not want, he craves. He does not count what he has, he counts what he lacks. And in his pursuit, he never defines enough." That's why greed doesn't end in moderation. It ends in catastrophe. Because the greedy don't plan for destruction, they assume they're too smart to fail. On The Parable of Sam Bankman-Fried, The Fall of the Crypto King, Sam Bankman-Fried wasn't just another tech-savvy entrepreneur. He was hailed as the future of finance. an MIT prodigy, founder of FTX, a cryptocurrency exchange once valued at $32 billion. He rubbed shoulders with celebrities, was courted by politicians, sat on stages beside global leaders and world-class economists. He appeared on magazine covers, shared stages with Tony Blair and Bill Clinton. He had celebrities like Tom Brady and Steph Curry promoting him. He met with U.S. senators and was crafting crypto regulation bills with lawmakers. He was the golden boy of a golden age. He wore cargo shorts, played video games in interviews, and preached altruism. He convinced the world he wasn't in it for the money. He was building wealth only to give it all away. This was the genius twist. He weaponized humility to hide ambition. He cloaked greed in the language of ethics, effective altruism. But behind the scenes, something darker was brewing. FTX was supposed to be the future of transparent finance. But Sam was secretly channeling billions in customer deposits into his hedge fund, Alameda Research, making wild bets in volatile crypto markets. Using user funds like poker chips in a casino, he rigged himself. He wasn't rescuing the world. He was gambling with its trust. He thought he could outsmart the chaos. And for a while, he did. He played God, until reality hit. The collapse heard around the world. In November 2022, a single leaked balance sheet exposed the truth. Alameda's assets were built on air, over-leveraged and backed by nothing but FTT, a token FTX had created. Confidence shattered overnight. Within 72 hours, $8 billion in customer funds evaporated. FTX imploded. Investors scrambled. Regulators swarmed.
And Sam?
He was arrested in the Bahamas, like a fallen prince caught escaping his burning kingdom. The empire he spent a decade building, destroyed by one central sin, the belief that he could bend reality to fit his ambition. A father in Korea lost his daughter's medical fund. A teacher in Canada lost her pension. A small business in India folded because the owner had parked his working capital in FTX. Suicides were reported. Lawsuits flooded in, and trust in the entire crypto ecosystem was shattered. And what about Sam? He was arrested, convicted of fraud, faces decades behind bars. Greed is not a financial problem. It is a psychological wound disguised as ambition. Machiavellian, Marcus Aurelius interpreted, Sam could have walked away a hero, a revolutionary, a visionary billionaire who actually made good on his promises. But one act of greed, one willful deception rooted in ego, annihilated everything he had ever built. Not gradually, instantly. Power without discipline is a curse. Marcus Aurelius once said, "It is not death that a man should fear, but he should fear never beginning to live according to nature." Sam began to live outside of nature, outside of limits. He believed his intelligence made him untouchable. That risk didn't apply to him. That consequences were for smaller men. This is where greed becomes fatal, when it disguises itself as vision. When a man believes his end justifies any means, even theft, even fraud, even ruin, he told himself, "I'll fix it later. I'm smarter than the market. It's for the greater good." But the universe doesn't care about your narrative. It punishes hubris with merciless precision. Thousands of ordinary people lost life savings. Celebrities like Tom Brady and Larry David were pulled into lawsuits. The entire crypto market destabilized, triggering a wave of bankruptcies. Charities, small businesses, and institutions once funded by FTX left hanging. One anonymous FTX user lost $2 million, a family inheritance meant to pay for his disabled daughter's lifelong care. Another retired teacher from New York lost her entire pension fund. She had trusted the boy genius because everyone said he was the safe bet. Sam didn't just lose money. He shattered trust in a system. He triggered generational ripple effects. The final irony, a legacy of ruin. Today, Sam Bankman-Fried sits in a prison cell. No more spotlights. No more TED Talks. No more Bahamas penthouses. The man who promised to give away everything ended up taking everything and giving back only ruin. His face was once on the cover of Forbes, Fortune, and Time. Now it's plastered on indictments. A name once spoken in admiration, now muttered with contempt. This is the brutal irony of unchecked greed. The higher you rise on the backs of others, the louder your crash echoes when you fall. The stoic warning to every one of us. Seneca wrote, "He who has made a fair compact with poverty is rich." Sam made no pact with limits. He chased infinity. And like Icarus, he flew too close to the sun. The wax melted, and the world watched him fall, in slow motion, in real time. He had everything, but wanted just a little more. And that one final act of greed destroyed not just a company, but an entire legacy. 2. The corporate giant that choked itself, Enron. For years, Enron wasn't just a company, it was a myth in motion. Founded in 1985, it evolved into an energy titan, hailed as a visionary force in corporate America. Its executives were celebrated. Wall Street fawned. Business schools taught Enron as a model of innovation. By the late 1990s, Enron was valued at over $70 billion. Its slogan? Ask why. But no one asked how. They weren't just greedy, they were brilliantly deceptive. Enron didn't steal in the dark. They engineered greed in daylight, through special purpose entities. Fake companies used to hide losses and inflate profits. On paper, it looked like magic. In reality, it was financial fiction. Instead of producing real value, they started producing lies. Executives used mark-to-market accounting to project future profits as if they already existed. Every dollar was smoke, every quarter a performance. The turning point, when greed refused to stop. They had already made millions, hundreds of millions. They could have stopped. They could have come clean. They could have saved the company, their employees, their legacy. But greed never negotiates with reason. When an internal whistleblower raised red flags, they didn't investigate. They covered it up. They lied again. A single audit by an outsider. And suddenly the mountain of illusions came crashing down. October 2001, Enron's stock collapses from $90 to under $1 in just weeks. November 2001, they admit to overstating earnings by nearly $600 million. December 2001, Enron files for the largest bankruptcy in U.S. history at that time. More than 20,000 employees lost their jobs overnight. Many had invested their entire retirement savings into Enron stock, encouraged by company leadership. Pensions evaporated. Families were ruined. One employee, a single mother of two, lost over $800,000 in retirement savings. She had worked there for 17 years. Her American dream? Gone. She now lives in a one-bedroom apartment, working 2 jobs to pay rent. Investors, big and small, lost billions. Arthur Andersen, one of the top 5 accounting firms in the world, was complicit in shredding evidence. The scandal was so massive, the company itself ceased to exist. Executives like Jeffrey Skilling and Ken Lay, once treated like royalty, faced trial. Skilling got 24 years in prison. Lay died before sentencing. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." At Enron, the quality of thought was corrupted by the illusion of invincibility. They believed they were untouchable. That success justified deception. That the applause meant they were right. But Stoicism teaches us this. No external achievement can substitute for internal virtue. Greed is not simply desire. It's desire unmoored from reason. It begins when we tell ourselves, just a little more. It ends when there's nothing left to take and nothing left of us. Enron is a case study in hubris, the ancient Greek concept of excessive pride that leads to self-destruction. They didn't fail because they weren't smart. They failed because they betrayed their own principles. They destroyed lives because they thought they could cheat the universe. But as Epictetus reminds us, you may not control events, but you can control your judgment. The leaders of Enron lost that judgment, and in doing so, they lost everything. Here's the most bitter irony. Had they stopped just 1 quarter earlier, they could have walked away legends. Had they admitted a small failure, they might have saved their empire. But greed doesn't know how to stop. It has no brakes, no exit ramp, no ceiling. Once it possesses the mind, it whispers, one more bonus, one more lie, one more quarter. And then, all at once, the empire collapses under its own weight. 3. The small-time greed that turned deadly, the McDonald's monopoly scandal. You remember the McDonald's monopoly game, right? Peel a sticker, match a set, win a car, $1 million, a vacation. Simple, innocent. Millions of Americans played it, dreaming of life-changing prizes over a $2 cheeseburger. What they didn't know was that the entire thing was rigged. Meet Jerome Jacobson, the man behind the heist. He wasn't a gangster. He wasn't a financial genius. He was the head of security for the company that printed McDonald's game pieces. A quiet man, an ex-cop, someone no one paid much attention to. And that anonymity, it became his weapon. Between 1989 and 2001, Jacobson stole the most valuable Monopoly prize pieces. The $1 million winners, the luxury car tokens, the high-stake vacation stickers. Instead of letting the public win, he handed them to a network of fake winners. Mobsters, drug dealers, his own relatives, even strangers he'd meet in parking lots. In exchange, He'd take a cut, $50,000 here, $100,000 there. At first it was cautious, selective, quiet. He kept it small to avoid attention. And it worked. Over 12 years, he funneled over $24 million into fraudulent winnings into a web of fake luck. People across America saw headlines like, "A grandmother of four wins $1 million in McDonald's Monopoly. Ninth single mom scores luxury car from Big Mac." All fake, all scripted, all paid for by greed. But then, greed whispered, "Why stop now?" He had enough. He could have stopped. Lived quietly, rich, unbothered, free. But that's not how greed works. Greed doesn't say, "Congratulations." It says, "You got away with it? Now do it bigger." He started involving more people. More winners, louder winners, less careful. One winner was a strip club owner with ties to the mob. Another was a drug trafficker in Florida. He even pulled in distant acquaintances who could barely keep a secret. And with every new fake win, the illusion cracked a little more. The FBI got a tip, a phone call, one of those quiet whispers that begins the unraveling of empires. They launched Operation Final Answer, an undercover mission designed to expose the entire fraud. Agents posed as movie producers and flew fake winners to Las Vegas under the pretense of making a documentary. They recorded everything. Slips, contradictions, repeated stories told just a little too perfectly. In 2001, the FBI made their move. More than 50 people were arrested. The illusion shattered, the brand shaken, the public stunned. When greed becomes identity. Here's the real lesson. Jacobson didn't keep going because he needed more money. He kept going because the scam became who he was. It gave him power, control, a secret world where he was the god of luck. And like many who fall to greed, he believed the lie. "I'm too smart to get caught." But here's the stoic truth. The greatest danger comes not from what we lack, but from what we refuse to let go. Epictetus. Jacobson couldn't let go. He had millions, he had freedom, but he kept playing the game, not for survival, but for ego. He forgot the fundamental law of nature. That which is built on deception eventually collapses under its own weight. The fallout. Lives destroyed, trust broken. McDonald's had to explain why no legitimate player had won a major prize in over a decade. Consumers sued, public trust evaporated, and those who took the winning pieces? Many were sentenced to prison. Some lost their homes. Others, like Gloria Brown, a single mother manipulated into posing as a winner, ended up financially and emotionally destroyed. She never recovered. She said, "They told me it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I just didn't realize that opportunity would be prison." And Jacobson? Sentenced to federal prison, released years later, quietly, alone. A man who had access to a gold mine and still chose to dig deeper until it collapsed on top of him. The deeper lesson. Greed is not just theft, it's addiction. What starts as a single selfish act becomes a need, a compulsion, a hunger that grows stronger every time you feed it. And like all addictions, it blinds you to the approaching cliff. He who is not satisfied with little is satisfied with nothing. Epicurus. Jacobson had it all until he wanted more. And in the end, he lost not just his wealth, but his name, his peace, and his legacy. 4. The political face of greed, the Marcos family, Philippines. Ferdinand Marcos ruled the Philippines for 21 years. And for 2 decades, he painted himself as a patriot, a war hero, a statesman, a guardian of the nation. But behind the image was a dynasty of deception, and at its core, a bottomless greed. The greed behind the throne. It wasn't just Ferdinand. It was Imelda Marcos, his wife, who turned political power into personal empire. Together, they didn't just steal money, they drained the soul of a nation. The estimated amount stolen? $5 to $10 billion. That's billion. In a country where millions couldn't afford rice. They used offshore banks, shell corporations, fake names, and numbered Swiss accounts to funnel wealth out of the country quietly, systematically, relentlessly. But greed doesn't like silence. It wants to show off. Imelda turned herself into a global spectacle. Over 3,000 pairs of designer shoes in her closet. Hundreds of gowns and tiaras stored in private museum rooms. Palaces built across the islands, one of which had a refrigerated room just for her flowers, while entire villages outside had no electricity or running water. They once chartered a Concorde jet just for shopping in Europe. While they flew in diamonds, their people lived in tin roof shacks. Hospitals lacked basic medicine. Children died of malnutrition. Yet Imelda claimed she needed to look beautiful for the people. Narcissism disguised as national duty. When greed crosses the line. For years, the Marcos family operated untouched. Authoritarian rule silenced the press, censored dissent, and jailed opponents. They crushed uprisings, buried evidence, and bought loyalty with favors. They thought they were untouchable, but greed never knows when to stop. It was one wire transfer too many, one secret account exposed. Swiss authorities froze the Marcos accounts in 1986, and the floodgates opened. The people power revolution began. Millions filled the streets of Manila. They weren't armed, just furious. They stood shoulder to shoulder, Catholics, students, workers, grandmothers. Even soldiers defected, because even they couldn't stomach the lies anymore. And just like that, the regime that ruled with steel and gold was brought down by sandals and fists. The Stoics teach, the greater the illusion of control, the more brittle the empire. Marcos ruled with force. He controlled wealth, law, and media. But greed blinded him, and that blindness made him arrogant. He forgot the Stoic truth. Fortune gives and fortune takes. Nothing borrowed from the world is truly yours. The palaces were seized. The shoes were paraded as a global mockery. They fled in helicopters, humiliated, their stolen wealth useless in exile. Even in death, Ferdinand Marcos's body was denied burial in the National Cemetery for decades, a symbolic exile from the very people he claimed to serve. That's the price of unchecked power driven by greed. You don't just lose your country. You lose your honor, your name, your legacy. But here's the most shocking part. Even decades later, the ghosts of that greed still linger. The Marcos name remains divisive, polarizing, and controversial. Some defend them. Others rage at the historical amnesia. Why? Because greed never just ruins the greedy. It contaminates generations. It fractures national memory. It divides families. It warps truth. Even now, many Filipinos argue whether the Marcos era was golden or damned. But here's the Stoic truth. You can't rewrite virtue. You can only bury guilt under gold until it rots its way back to the surface. 5. Modern-day greed in action. Influencers, fraud, and the downfall. In 2021, she had it all. 1 million followers, lavish brand deals, a carefully curated Instagram life filled with poolside cocktails, mindset mantras, and motivational quotes in pastel fonts. Her name was Jessica Brooke. At least that's what she called herself online. She wasn't a Wall Street banker. She wasn't a tech founder. She was just a former waitress turned crypto queen. She sold exclusive crypto investment courses, went on $997 each. You'll learn how I turned $10 into $100,000 in 3 months. It was fake, all of it. She didn't invest. She didn't trade. The screenshots of her earnings were photoshopped. But she had what mattered most in today's world: trust and illusion. Her followers believed in her, worshipped her, sent their savings. One man reportedly took out a second mortgage to get in early. And for a while, she played the role perfectly. Rented Lamborghinis, posted dream big captions, flew private, claimed it was passive income, hired actors to pose as successful students. But she wanted more. So she created a fake crypto token, Glowcoin. She hyped it as the next Ethereum, promised 100x returns, claimed it was backed by an international fintech firm, which didn't exist. When her followers bought in, she immediately dumped her stake for real dollars, crashing the price to zero overnight. Thousands lost everything. One 19-year-old attempted suicide. A single mother wrote, "I believed in her more than myself. She destroyed my hope." A Reddit post exposing her scams went viral. Investigators from 3 countries opened fraud probes. Class action lawsuits followed. Her accounts were banned, assets frozen. She vanished. Today, she's broke, in hiding, and reportedly under federal watch. This wasn't an isolated case. Remember BitConnect? In 2016, it promised insane crypto returns, up to 40% a month, using a secret trading bot. Influencers paraded it on YouTube. One man famously screamed, "BitConnect!" in front of a crowd like a rock star. Behind the curtain, it was a pure Ponzi scheme. By 2018, it collapsed. $3.5 billion evaporated. People lost homes, marriages, and entire retirements. One man who invested his son's college fund later appeared on national TV. Eyes hollow, voice broken. The founders disappeared. Warrants were issued, some were arrested, others are still missing. The illusion of just one more. Here's what the Stoics knew, and what modern minds forget. Wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants. Epictetus. Greed doesn't start with evil, it starts with comparison, with seeing others having more and believing you deserve it too. The influencer didn't scam for survival. She did it because millions wasn't enough. BitConnect didn't collapse from incompetence. It collapsed because the founders kept pushing. They could have stopped, but greed whispers, just one more launch, one more coin, one more million. And then the dominoes fall. Greed is like a drug. And just like with addicts, the final hit is always fatal. It's not just headlines. It's the father who pulled his kids from school, the single mom who drained her retirement fund, the college student who now lives in a van, ashamed to go home.
And worst of all,
they all thought they were investing in hope. They didn't lose to the market. They lost to someone's greed. And when trust is betrayed like that, the damage isn't financial. It's spiritual. These influencers could have built empires, created honest businesses, lived respected lives. But instead, their names are now cautionary tales. Not because they weren't smart, but because they were greedy. And greed, no matter how pretty it looks online, always ends in ruin. Segment 6, the psychology of it. Why greed always self-destructs. Here's what most people don't realize. Greed isn't just wanting more. It's an illness of the soul, a compulsion that hijacks the mind. It doesn't whisper, it claws. It doesn't ask, it demands. And the most terrifying part? It doesn't stop when you win, it accelerates. The greedy mind has no concept of enough. No final number, no safe exit, no endgame. It believes the next big win will finally bring peace, but peace never comes. It's a psychological trap. The moment you serve greed, you become its slave. Bernie Madoff, the architect of his own prison. Bernie Madoff didn't need more. He already had it all. He was a multimillionaire before the Ponzi scheme began. He owned mansions, yachts, political connections. People trusted him with their life savings. So why keep going? Because greed rewires the brain. The more he got, the more he felt he had to maintain the illusion. He told himself, I'll make it back. I'll fix it later. Just one more investor. But that's the sickness. One more never ends. Eventually, a few clients wanted to withdraw their funds. Just a few billion. And the empire collapsed. Like a sandcastle hit by a tsunami. What followed wasn't just lawsuits. It was annihilation. One son hanged himself on the anniversary of Bernie's arrest. The other died of cancer, estranged from the man who had destroyed their name. Hundreds of retirees lost everything. Pensions, homes, hope. Stoic insight. Wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants. Epictetus. Bernie had every possession and a bottomless void of want. That void became his grave. Elizabeth Holmes, the voice of revolution, drenched in lies. She wanted to be the next Steve Jobs. Black turtlenecks, media interviews, $1 billion valuation. Theranos was the name, a blood-testing miracle, supposedly. She sold the world a dream. Test for 200 diseases with a single drop of blood. But it didn't work, not even close. Instead of admitting the science was broken, she doubled down. She lied to investors, manipulated data, even faked demos for military contracts. Real patients received false cancer diagnoses, misdiagnosed HIV tests. Some died.
why?
Because the greed for power, the desire to be remembered, blinded her to consequence. She could have pivoted, she could have paused, but in her mind, stopping was failure. And for the greedy, failure is worse than death. She's now in prison. Her baby born behind bars. The woman once worth $4.5 billion, now she's worth nothing, not even her name. Joe Low, the party prince of plunder. Joe Low wasn't a politician. He was a Malaysian financier. Young, charming, educated in elite schools. He convinced the Malaysian government to create a development fund, 1MDB. It was supposed to uplift the country. Instead, he stole $4.5 billion. What did he do with it? Bought a $250 million yacht, gave gifts to celebrities, including a $9 million diamond to Miranda Kerr. Funded the Wolf of Wall Street film. Irony so thick it suffocates. He became the walking symbol of excess. Champagne, supermodels, private jets, golden toilets. Then the scandal broke, and suddenly, Interpol warrants, lawsuits, exile, a ghost on the run. His friends vanished. His assets were seized. His face became a global joke. And the country he was supposed to help? Malaysia was left with billions in debt. Schools collapsed. Hospitals suffered. The people paid for one man's greed. Stoic insight. It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more that is poor. Unto Seneca. Jolo had billions and died spiritually bankrupt. Greed convinces you that you can control the damage, that you'll know when to stop, that you're the exception, that you're smarter than the fall. But history doesn't lie. No one ever is. It's the classic Greek tragedy. Hubris, the pride that says I'm untouchable, always ends in nemesis, the divine punishment. The more you lie to gain, the more fragile your reality becomes. And once a single thread unravels, the entire illusion implodes. Not gradually, instantly, violently, publicly. Greed doesn't just destroy your life, it rewrites your identity. Here's the most brutal part. When greed finally crashes, people don't just lose their money. They lose their entire sense of self. CEO becomes a criminal. The pastor becomes a fraud. The role model becomes a warning. And once trust is gone, it never returns the same way. Reputation is glass. Once shattered, you might glue it back, but the cracks remain, visible, permanent. So now you've seen it. Greed doesn't wear a mask, it wears a mirror. It looks just like you, just a little hungrier. And it never walks in shouting, it whispers, "Take it, you deserve more." But one act, just one, and everything you've built, sacrificed for, sweated over, can vanish in the blink of a choice. You might think, that would never be me. But neither did Madoff, or Holmes, or the pastor, the athlete, the charity worker, the doctor, the spouse. They didn't fall because they were monsters. They fell because they were human, and they believed they were invincible. Now here's the question that matters. When it's your turn, when the offer's on the table, the stakes are high and no one's watching, what will you do? The answer will determine not just your legacy, but whether your life ends as a lesson or an example. Because in the end, it's not the size of the act that destroys you. It's how far you were willing to go for something you never truly needed. So what's the random? So what is it? What's the difference between those who fall to greed and those who walk away with their soul intact? It's not intelligence, not education, not status, money, or talent. It's restraint. The quiet discipline to say no when everything in you screams yes. Restraint is the invisible armor the world never applauds, because restraint doesn't make headlines. You don't see restraint in the news. You see collapse. You don't see the CEO who turned down the bribe, the nurse who didn't overcharge, the athlete who stayed clean. But they exist, and they are powerful not because they had nothing to lose, but because they knew some things were too valuable to gamble. Reputation, character, peace of mind, legacy. In a world obsessed with more, restraint is rebellion. It says, I don't need to win at any cost. I don't need what isn't mine. I don't trade integrity for applause. And that makes you untouchable. Not because you're perfect, but because you've mastered the hardest human instinct to control, the hunger for more. A final truth you can't ignore. You can build a life on kindness, discipline, and hard work for 40 years. But one impulsive act of greed, one moment of weakness, one choice made in the dark, can erase it all. History doesn't care how long you stood tall. It remembers how you fell. So the next time you're offered more than you deserve, ask yourself, is it worth becoming a cautionary tale? Or do you want to be something else? The person who walked away, not because they were afraid to lose, but because they already knew what truly mattered. Because in the end, restraint won't make you rich overnight, but it will make you whole for a lifetime. And that is something no amount of greed can ever buy.